and there are tools, ways of looking at it, which improves the process of making key decisions.
You're doing good, not only for the business, but you're doing good for society.
So it's research that has data which you can trust.
Combine it with a business game to create a sustainable chain of endless mutual benefit.
We like to run with the crowd. We like to do what others like us do.
There's also very little risk.
I did skim through the book as well, and I think there are a bunch of interesting things. I mean, the topic or the headline is really the business of business is not just business. So we're going to talk about that. And a few things that I quickly picked up, and then I'm going to hand over to Sudapa to explain it from her vantage point, is that, of course, businesses today do much more than just produce goods and services or deliver services and earn profits and reward their shareholders. They do much more. But I think it's also the gradual realization that in achieving those profit numbers, they have to do more in conjunction with what society needs. And I think it's an interesting intersection of what policy is doing, what business is doing, what business is influencing policy to do, which is really government, and what government itself is doing. So the role of all of these three, plus civil society, non-profits, and the role they play in ensuring that India Inc. is more responsible is quite fascinating. And I think that's one of the things this book does bring out well through the eyes and words of all the many authors who've written the chapters within it, and three of whom are sitting here. So without further ado, as they say, I'm going to start off. So Sudapa, tell us, how do you define, or rather when you say that the business of business is not just business, what do you mean?
Okay, first, a very warm welcome on, I will completely disagree with Govind and say on a terrible day. I just wish the sun was shining and a lot of the people who were trying to come from the suburbs could have made it. Instead, we have a terrible rain-swept day, not a beautiful rain-swept day for me. Anyway, but thank you so much to all of you who've braved it and come here. Many thanks for your time. And I hope we can make your time worthwhile. So the way I describe the book is, while there are a lot of books on responsible business practices and business responsibility, I think it's the first time, and that's the subject I'm really passionate about, that I have tried to use what I call a behavioral insights lens on key business decisions. And that in itself actually substantively improves the quality of key decisions. Here I've used it for decisions which are not just consequential for businesses and markets, but also impact society. It impacts cultural norms, it impacts identity, it impacts power structures, it impacts our day-to-day lives. So that's really the way I will describe the book. It's an ideas book. I don't pretend to know the answers of the three problems that I've looked at in the book. The three problems are environmental sustainability, pretty much the air that we breathe in, inclusion, or what I call unequal participation in the economy, and the last one, which is my favorite chapter, which I think impedes progress, not just in the first two, but is pretty much a problem by itself, is social norms and stereotypes, and what they do to all of us and our brains. So that's essentially what the book is. My overriding objective for writing the book is not just the themes, which I find extremely interesting, and they're complex problems, and a behavioral insights lens actually helps illuminate complex problems, but I wanted to actually spend a little bit of time on explaining what a behavioral insights lens is. Should I start with that, and then I get on to my two extremely illustrious...
Before that, I think it would also be instructive, because I didn't know either.
Yeah.
So what made you choose this theme? I mean, why did you specialize in behavioral insight? And was there a specific trigger, or is it just academic path?
So I just, I thought after 24 years of full-time employment, and most of the time was done in money management, where I thought I was making rich people slightly richer or slightly poorer. So I kind of quit full-time employment because of that reason. And I think I strayed into academia. It happened by accident. And I had read a book prior to that, which I think, and I choose my words carefully, was a life-changing book for me, which was Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. And I got the underpinnings of this subject when I, after quitting full-time employment, went to Harvard, did a fellowship there. And then they called me back, and I was at a panel where I was with a lady, just like we're in a panel here, who was using, the insights or the applications of behavioral economics on other things. She was using it on gender and equity, and she shared her book with me, which made me come back, and I actually went with a research agenda to IIM Ahmedabad and said, we are not sure about research, but why don't you teach a course, which made me teach a course on the subject. And obviously that made me, and that was to the postgrad students, so it was a 20-session full credit course that I taught for 2 years. So it made me research the subject, and I discovered that this subject has gems in terms of practical frameworks, tools, a way of looking at problems, which can be applied to the business world, actually to the organizations as such, and how it improves. And there are tools, ways of looking at it, which improves the process of making key decisions. And it's actually like a toolbox with a bunch of tools and techniques. And, so that's what I thought we could cover in the course of this conversation. And I will be hogging more of the time, even though I have way more illustrious people sitting here than me, Mr. Godrej, Parth, and even the moderator. By explaining a couple of tenets. It's a nuanced subject, so it's not something that we can do in 1 hour. But I will give a couple of tenets which kind of get woven into the book, and probably in my mind are some of the most important things which applies to organizational decision-making. So this is a subject which is actually at the intersection of economics, psychology, how people behave in groups, goes back to evolutionary times, how our brain is wired. In the last couple of decades, a lot of it is corroborated by neuroscience. And it's based on, the most important thing is, it's based on decades and decades of empirical evidence. And in the book, I've not used cutting-edge research. What I've used is research which has been longitudinal, done over many years, widespread, not just in one geography, but in many geographies. And that's the research you see here. So it's research that has data which you can trust. So I'll give 2 examples of 2 behavioral tenets. I'll explain those. And then, we'll see examples of how businesses have, sometimes intuitively without knowing the subject, and sometimes knowingly may have woven this in the way, in businesses in the Godrej Group as well as in the JSW Group. So let me start with one example, which actually comes from psychology, and it's something which used to be very, very famous in the field of psychology, done in the 1950s. But I think it kind of tellingly demonstrates something in our brain that's wired in our brain. So if you have a card which has 3 lines, okay, and the lines are of different sizes, okay, this is called the Solomon-Asch experiment. So one is, say, 1 foot, the other is 3 feet, and the other is 5 feet. And you have another card, which is, say, 3 feet. So to any person who's looking at it, if you look at this card of 3 feet, you know what it corresponds to on the big card, right? It corresponds to the middle one. 1 feet, 3 feet, 5 feet. So crystal clear. So in the experiment, in the Asch experiment, what happens is it's done between 7 to 9 people, and 6 out of those 7 people are stooges, or these are the experimenters, people who've been told to give the wrong answer. Right? And only the last person, the 7th or the 9th person, is an actual person who is hearing all of these people give the wrong answer. So if it's a 3 feet stick, they all say 1 feet. Okay? What happens to the 7th person? Right? And this is a research which has been done again and again and again. And it has been found that 75% of the time, the 7th person gives the wrong answer. Okay? So that's the data, and that's frightening, right? You're not believing your eyes. Okay? Why does it happen? I mean, the intuitive answer very clearly is, you just have too much of self-doubts to give your own opinion. 6 people ahead of you, or 8 people before you, that's how the experiment was done in groups of 7 or 9, have given the wrong answer. So you change your mind and you think there's something wrong with me, all of these people can't possibly be wrong, and you give the wrong answer, right? There's two interesting corollaries here. If you told the person to write down his answer privately, obviously they would write the right answer, okay? And the second corollary is, if even one person gave the right answer, the seventh person, or the actual person, almost 85 or 90% of the time, they also give the right answer. So you don't want to be the odd person out, right? In other words, we love to conform. We love to say or be part of the crowd. We don't want to be the odd one out. I will give one more example. If I were to walk out of this building and I was running an errand and I'm turning to, say, the right side, to do whatever it is that I was going to do. And if I see all of the people from that side suddenly running in the opposite direction, going towards the left, what would I instinctively, reflexively do? I would run with the crowd, right? Another name for this, and this is from evolutionary times, right? This is from hunter-gatherer times. People didn't wait to see the tiger. You saw people running in the opposite direction and you followed, right? So this is called the herding instinct. And another name for herding instinct is conformity bias. We like to run with the crowd. We like to do what others like us do, right? And this is wired into our brain from evolutionary times. The word bias always has negative connotations, right? If I say conformity bias and we don't give our independent views, people say that, you always have sort of negative connotations with it. But anything that exists, any feature that exists in our brain is there for a good reason. When I ran with the crowd, that's probably what saved my life. It helped me negotiate the world, keeps me alive, which is what the brain is for. It's meant to do things reflexively. Be that as it were, it's the same brain that walks into a boardroom or into a senior leadership team discussion, meeting, where you're deciding a large investment or a merger or an acquisition or hiring a chief executive, and it's wired for these shortcuts, right? So it's wired to conform. So shouting from the rooftops that, I want an open organization, I want people to be open-minded, it's very, very difficult. If you think back on some of the, famous scams which have happened, even with the NSE, all of that, if you really analyze it threadbare, it comes from, in many of them you've had stellar boards, it comes from conformity bias, where if 2 people or 3 people, and imagine, in my Solomon Asch experiment, people were drawn from outside. You didn't need to interact with them. Whether it's in a board or in a senior leadership room, these are people that you're interacting with daily. There is an organizational hierarchy. There is a social dominance, right? So if I am with extremely illustrious people like Mr. Godrej and with Parth, do I say my point of view or do I tone it down? I mean, I might not today tone down anything because I've been in this journey for 10 years. But, when you're coming in first, chances are that you would, right? So the whole thing about this book and about behavioral sciences is it's very difficult to rewire the brain. And if it is very difficult to rewire the brain, what can you actually do? And that's a bunch of interventions which you can do around the environment, and that's what we will get on to later on.
I, for one, have never been interested in conventional wisdom. So I find it strange. Certainly, if there's a mathematical fact and somebody said something different, I wouldn't agree with that. But these things happen in real life. And we also saw in our Godrej properties business that we could actually take special steps to overcome this. And Godrej Properties took a clear decision that they are building homes for a diverse population, their own talent should reflect this. So they aimed for 50% cis men, 40% cis women, and 10% LGBT and disabled people.
So just one thing. So I wanted to point out, I stopped by talking at length about one bias, which is a very critical bias, which is conformity bias, right? One of the ways in which you can rid the organization or the context of conformity, and that is what Mr. Godrej has started talking about, is to have a set of diverse perspectives. So if everybody toes the line and says the same thing, you're not getting, and there's enough empirical evidence which says not so much individually excellent people, but it's called the diversity bonus, and it's mathematically been actually even calculated by a gentleman called Scott Page. Read that up. It's an amazing book. It's called the diversity bonus, which says a very diverse set of people, and we're not talking here only talking of gender diversity, so that's one of the aspects Mr. Godrej is talking about, and rightly so, but cognitively diverse, people from different places, right? So your way you look at the world, the way you look at a problem, the way your assumptions regarding a problem, the lens you use is different. So it's extremely important to have diverse perspectives. Sorry, I interrupted.
Yes, absolutely. So to get rid of these biases, they had conversations with people in all levels and in all locations, and did an internal study of a woman called Project Wolf. And then they started a collective of real estate women to help overcome these biases. And similar initiatives were taken for LGBTQ and disabled people. For disabled people, providing a level playing field and taking full advantage of compensating advantages like the excellent hearing and smelling abilities of the blind, that a cognitive difference that comes because of your disability. In the book, there is an excellent example of a special roadworthy wheelchair empowering people with disabilities to do deliveries. So these kind of initiatives can help overcome these problems. Megha Goel, head of GPL HR, is in the audience, and anyone who wants to ask her more questions about this is welcome to do so.
The data for Godrej Properties, you must point out, from about, I think I'm in my second tenure as a board director. It started out with, I think, 10 or 11%, Gaurav, if I'm right, and it's now 41%, right?
It's 41% now, and it was 26% earlier.
So it's today in a construction sector, 41.8%. When I actually heard that, I was actually quite staggered, because it's quite amazing. Yeah.
And so they built inclusion into systems, performance parity, pay parity, promotion parity. And so today there is 41% of all these groups. So all these things can be done to achieve these goals. And diversity certainly gives us a lot of benefits.
Parth, so I did go through your chapter on cement and how the journey towards net zero cement or green cement involves multi-stakeholder, and I think that's what you're arguing for, that even as the industry itself has been fairly progressive in doing many things, but you still need to do much more. So walk us through that.
Yeah, I think when we entered the cement business, there were already a lot of cement players in the country. And the first question that we had to ask ourselves is that why does the country need another cement player? And how are we going to be different from the others? What are we going to bring as a value proposition to our customers, to our stakeholders? And one of the biggest learnings or findings for us was that cement is a very hard to abate sector, which has very high carbon dioxide emissions. And it's one of the largest polluting industries in the world. If you look at the JSW Group, from steel making to cement making to thermal power making, these are all very hard to abate sectors. And we needed to, start the journey of going into, green and net zero. And for two reasons. One is obviously cost. Many people think that if you go green, it's more expensive. It's quite the inverse, actually. And that was a big learning on the entry strategy, that if cement, the calciner, where you actually convert the limestone into clinker, is actually the world's best incinerator. And we realized that if instead of burning coal, if we can burn municipal solid waste, if we can start burning pharmaceutical waste, if we can start burning agricultural waste, which is going into landfills, that would do great to the society, because you're taking away waste which is lying and causing major societal problems. Two, it would reduce our cost. So that was one of the ways in which we were able to reduce our raw material cost. And then to the end customer, globally, especially in the developed countries like Europe and in the Far East, people pay a premium for green cement. But we realize that in India, it's not fair to expect anyone to pay a premium. But even if we can get them to prefer green cement, it would allow us to enter the market and gain market share. And that's what happened, and that's what's happening. And these two reasons of A, lowering the cost, and B, improving the fact that you're a greener product, allowed us to enter the market. So you're doing good, not only for the business, but you're doing good for society. And I think that's really what this book is about, is that you can do a lot more with your business. It not only does good to society, but it also proves to be a huge motivator for all the stakeholders. All the employees, every day when they come to work and they say that we're making the world's greenest cement, they're working for a cause. And that world's greenest cement is coming from India, which is amazing. And this is something that we took when we went public last year. And all the international investors, when we wrote that we are the world's greenest product, they stood up and took notice. And they were like, oh, how? And what are you doing? And then when we told them the stories about the alternative fuels, the waste that comes out of the steel making that goes in as a raw material into cement making, being water positive, being plastic positive. Then we even managed to raise funds from some green funds, which normally never touch hard to abate sector. So it's pretty pertinent, and it opens, and Sudapa was on our board for 10 years. And in that 10 years, we went from a very small company to now a decent medium-sized company. But her insights were always to look at things very differently, to look at things from a human perspective, and look at all these elements in order to motivate not only internally but also externally. And that's the journey we're on. So it's been quite good.
And I'm going to come back and ask you about what the future looks like. Yeah, go ahead.
So I wanted to ask you, so, if you were to sort of scale this aspect much more than what it is, tell me what, you've spoken about some of the enablers. What would enable you to do that at an even, bigger scale than what it has?
No, so I'll give you an example of what's happening now. JSW is entering the auto sector. And it's the first time since independence that a new Indian company is entering the auto sector. The last time an Indian group entered auto was the Tatas and the Mahindras. I mean, India has not had a homegrown auto company since then. And again, the same question.
So Hindustan Motors is not Indian, or you're not treating?
No, I mean, they've been there pre-independence.
Even before that, okay.
Yeah. Hindustan Motors, pre-independence. Maruti has come with Suzuki. Yeah. You have Hyundai, Kia. You have Volkswagen, Skoda. You have all these are all, MG, although we own it now, but it's owned by the Chinese, and we've taken over it. But JSW Motors is the first Indian company post-independence that is entering auto. Now again, the same question. Why does India need another car company? There's so many already. All the large players are there. How do we motivate employees? How do we attract employees into our business? And the sole thing that we're doing is that we are only going to launch new energy vehicles, either electric, plug-in hybrids, or range-extended electric vehicles. And the reason is very simple. The reason is because India is a net importer of crude oil. Today, when the war happened in Iran, the rupee has devalued to 95 to the dollar because the oil prices went from $60 a barrel to more than $100 a barrel. And India is very, very vulnerable. But we are not vulnerable in our own power generation. We have enough coal in our country. We have enough solar, wind, hydro. So when we have this thesis that we want India to go electric, we want India to adopt new energy vehicles, and we want to do it so that India becomes self-reliant, it attracts a very different set of employees. It attracts a very different set of dealers. It will attract a very different set of customers. So again, it's more about the why more than, okay, it's great business, you'll have a great return on equity, great return on capital employed. We will talk about all that when we need to go raise funds. But when you start a business, if you're starting it with the right intent, if you're starting it with this intent that you're trying to create a positive impact on your society and on your country, that will attract a very different sort of crowd than if you just say, oh, I'm going to bring another internal combustion engine car because I think India needs one. But why does India need one? It's not clear. So I think, that's...
Okay. So, Mr. Godrej, let me pose this question from 2 points of view. So one is the internal part, which is inside Godrej, when you look around you, and how do you relate to the title of this book? And there are a lot of examples that are there in the book itself. The second is externally. I mean, the mangrove project, for example, which sort of dovetails a little differently from maybe, because it doesn't directly pay dividends to what you're doing or the products you're selling and so on. So tell us about both sides and where they intersect.
Right. Talked generally about our Good and Green initiative, both the historical aspects of what our company did, and in 2010 we set up the Good and Green initiative. So, and doing good is very sound. What goes around comes around. Doing good isn't just a cost. The gain outweighs all that's lost. My grandfather probably saw these examples and found no flaw. He bought faraway marshy land. His critics just couldn't understand. They concluded that he had gone quite mad, but today we are glad, not sad. A township then slowly arose, and this is where our business grows. We provided every needed tool, housing, hospital, and school. My uncle, known as SPG, way back could clearly see the environment was under stress. Neglect, he knew, would be a mess. Our creekside land was reserved, the mangroves there well preserved. And from my office I gaze out there, a Mumbai view that's very rare, with greenery all the way until you sight New Bombay. And now and then with friends I float on a gently moving boat with pink flamingos in full flight. To my mind, a splendid sight. In saving tigers, he played a role. The environment was a major goal. So sustainability was in our DNA. From early days, we thought that way. And here I think we all ought to pay careful heed to Michael Porter. With shared value, there's no cost for doing good, as nothing's lost. All it takes is a thinking brain to remove a societal pain and combine it with a business gain to create a sustainable chain of endless mutual benefit. This concept is a tremendous hit. We thought that we should also try and see if we could apply this philosophy to our group. Our employees also joined the loop. Since employees played an important role, they were motivated to achieve the goal. In the year 2010, studies were commissioned, and then, with the help of DASRA and FSG, our new program, one could see. We aptly named it Good and Green, and what a journey it has been. And how do we define our role? What could be a proper goal? Now, the UN has a lengthy list, so in recounting, some would be missed. So I will focus on just 3 that I think would be the key for all the others to fall in place and enable us to win the race. Good health through perfect sanitation, environment, and education. All of these can be seen in our program, Good and Green. All industry should play a role in the carbon neutral goal. GHG emissions should be reduced. More green energy should be produced. And so without partiality, our goal for all is neutrality, whether water, carbon, or solid waste. And very soon we will make haste to make our net emissions 0. Will that make the group a hero? In 2010, the goal looked tall. But we took a reasoned call. Technology would save the day. So far, it has turned out that way. To achieve these goals, we will strive to do it all by 2035. As technology takes a leap, green energy gets very cheap. Keen observers quickly saw that solar also tracked Moore's law. Whether groundnut shell or bagasse, our India's full of biomass. At first, we thought we'd have to spend, but that's not true, for in the end, the more we thought and the more we slaved, we did invest, but we also saved. And solar is still getting cheaper. And as we start digging deeper, in India, it will hit the goal of being cheaper than even coal in just a handful of years. Already, we and our peers are sourcing solar electricity at lower rates than from the utility. For quite some time, we've been extorted as their finances aren't still sorted. A silver lining can be seen since it incentivizes green. Our cost of water is not so high. Therefore, we attempt to try to reduce our water consumption. But all the same, it's a safe assumption our water use won't disappear. And so to be neutral, I fear we will have to mitigate. Though fortunately, I can state that developing a watershed doesn't cost much, and instead, our agribusiness can benefit. The government will do its bit, but where it fails, we'll fill the breach, and hopefully we will reach many farmers on the cheap. But the benefits that we reap will compensate for the cost, and once again, nothing's lost. This year, there's fear of a drought. Our factories could be shut out. In recent years, we sought to try watershed developments nearby. In serving society, we succeed while providing for our own need. There are many paths that we can see for achieving carbon neutrality, but the cheapest way is certainly through energy efficiency. Real interest rates are rather low, and high returns quickly flow from any energy-saving device. For business, this is very nice. Not only are returns quite brisk, there's also very little risk. Thank you.
Okay, so let me come back to you, Sudapa. So, I think what you've done in the book is interesting because a lot of, I guess, emphasis is on the environmental side because that's where we are seeing big change, and what Parth also spoke about was an environmental response or response to environment. But there are two other issues that you've touched on, and gender is one, and diversity is another one. But tell us about, one of the things I noticed in the gender discussion is that when the Companies Act 2013 or the 2013 Companies Act amendment said that you have to have women on board, that brought about a change. That was a policy nudge. But companies themselves don't seem to have done as much as perhaps they could. So how do we approach this?
So the way I think about this whole problem is, there are many aspects to it.
And okay, let me, this thing. So I think one of the things you've done also in the book is that you've illustrated it with an example. You're saying that if you have greater gender diversity, including in, let's say, Forex trading desks, the quality of output or the productivity will be higher, but the contra opinion today is that trading desks, when we're talking about foreign exchange trading desks, should be manned by men because they're bigger risk takers. So I think you've addressed that issue and tried to respond to it.
So, it actually comes from, there's a very interesting acronym which was coined by somebody who, I've mentioned earlier. And it's a telling comment that I keep talking about Daniel Kahneman. And, he's a renowned psychologist. I mean, he was, he's no more. I use a lot of his experiments in my workshop. But he won the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2002. So it took a psychologist to dismantle the fundamental tenet of the classical economics that I learned and most people like me learned, which is that human beings are largely rational, right? And in psychology, it was known for years, on the other side, that they're not. And yet, in classical economics, there have been, forget us, there have been people who won Nobel Prize after Nobel Prize on that one classical tenet that, everything tends towards equilibrium and people are rational and neither is actually true, which actually shows how within a silo, blind spots develop. So blind spots, just like I said, a lot of things get wired into the brain. Blind spots is one of them because of just knowing. So we accept conventional wisdom. Everybody's not like you. Most people accept it, and you keep on building on top of that. So Daniel Kahneman uses an acronym when I come to gender, which is my favorite, and it can be applied to anything, not just gender. It's called WYSIAT. What you see is all there is. WYSIATI. And if people go away from this room, there are many things which are spoken about, but just with YCAT and maybe conformity bias as two things wired in the brain, that would be my job done. And hopefully that'll make you pick up the book and read much more about behavioral economics and the behavioral sciences. So YCAT is what we see the world. What we see in the world is what the world is, right? So if I see a lot of nurses are women, and if I see a lot of primary school teachers are women, that's our description of the world. And if I see a lot of CEOs are men, fighter pilots are men, that's our description of the world. But our brain is a sense-making creature. It loves to also make sense of what it sees. So very quickly, what is the description, the descriptive becomes prescriptive. What is becomes what should be. Women, nurses are mostly women because they must be great nurturers. Primary class teachers are women because they're just, again, great nurturers. CEOs are men because they must be decisive. They must be risk takers, right? Similarly so what happens, the brain takes the leap that what is becomes what should be, and that's what they're good at, and that is dangerous. And that's what creates a whole lot of myths and stereotypes. So a lot of the men are from, women are from Venus, men are from Mars. About 14 years ago, I would let all of this pass because you would think it's harmless, so big deal. It's not. This is what perpetuates all of the stereotypes that are that have resulted in many, many problems today. One of the things which I illustrate in this chapter, and there's a little fun aside to this chapter, this is a chapter I wrote, it's a piece that I wrote way back during COVID when I was writing a little bit for Economic Times. And I really liked it. I mean, call it vanity, call you what you will. And I thought this was too good. And I shared it with Govind. I said, this is too good to actually give to an ET. And I kept it. And then when this book happened, it kind of fitted it into that last section called Social Norms and Stereotypes. So I'll just give you a sneak peek into that chapter because it kind of exemplifies exactly what I spoke about just now. And then I'll have Parth and Mr. Godrej actually talk about some of the things that they've done to actually break stereotypes. And I've been party to some of them being on boards of both these companies. So in this, it's called Men and Money because the association is very clear that money is typically associated with men. And I come from the financial services side. In my own life, I've not seen a single trading desk which Govind referred to. There was just one woman trader that I knew in my entire ANZ and ABN AMRO days, which was all of, I think, close to 13 years. So this is a gentleman called John Coates, and he was a derivatives trader himself, and he worked in Wall Street, Deutsche Bank, and Goldman Sachs. And he observed that the trading desks were largely manned, pun intended, by men, and they were younger men. And so there was an absence of largely women and older men. And then he came back to the UK and teamed up with neuroscientists at Cambridge. And he actually tested the saliva of the younger men. And there is something in the neuroscience literature which is called the winner effect or the winner's effect. And it cuts across species. It's not just the human beings, it's also across species, chimpanzees, bonobo monkeys. And what it actually shows is something very interesting. If you're doing a similar transaction again and again for repeat gains, you tend to go and do more and more of it, not in the calibrated manner in which you ought to take risk, okay? So what John Coates found is that, and this is something we also come across in newspapers, with uncanny regularity about one rogue trader in a very established bank, suddenly, resulting in bankruptcies and losses of millions of dollars. Uncanny regularity every 5 to 6 years, one would see it in the newspapers, right? What John Coates found was that in the dealing rooms, and this is a very interesting play of both biology and environment. It's a double-sided feedback loop. The younger men obviously had in their saliva, it was very clear that their testosterone is far higher. Women have it in far lesser quantities, and it depletes as men get older. So what was happening was whenever they were winning, whenever they were taking gains, making gains which were, they were taking bets which were gains, or it was resulting in a gain, they would take bigger and bigger and bigger gains. Bigger bets, right? And they would make, so the bet sizes became larger and larger and larger, driven by the fact that they were winning. That's the winner effect, right? So calibrated, measured risk-taking gave way to emotions driving that risk-taking, right? And while the numbers were lower, what he found when he obviously tested the same thing, and their saliva obviously showed a lower testosterone, that for the women and older men were immune to the effect. Even when women were taking bets and winning, and the same held for also older men, then the same effect did not play out. So it was, and it worked the other way around for men as well. So when you were losing, then you would stop taking bets because you were losing. You were on a losing spree. And when you were winning, the environment around you, being again younger men, goaded you on, right? So my book, by the way, is not prescriptive. I am trying to drive a discourse which is in one direction, which is typically, in silos and people lecturing businesses to do something. I'm here actually trying to move the discourse into how do you create a compelling motive. So none of the book is prescriptive. It's trying to move the discourse in a certain direction. John Coates, however, makes a very clear prescription. His prescription is, in risk-taking roles of this nature, you need to have an environment where, if you have younger men, please have women, please have older men. That is your biggest risk mitigation technique. Now, this is a longitudinal study being carried out from 2005 onwards, probably till 2015, 18, 19, don't hold me to the exact time, but this is a long, more than a decade-long longitudinal study. But has anything changed? Even internationally today, the derivatives desks are largely men, because memes, stereotypes change, if at all they change, with a lag, and in this instance, reality itself has not changed. So it's actually, the harm that stereotypes can do. Sorry.
Sudapa, this is a very interesting example. And at the same time, you're advocating for discrimination and diversity.
What you need in risk-taking desks for calibrated risk management is actually women. What you have is men, and relatively younger men, because they're thought to be better risk-takers. In fact, there are some people who've actually read my book here and abroad who actually said that, what you're talking, you're very specifically giving, and I'm giving an example here of derivative desks, because that's what the research is on, is probably holds across risk management functions.
Parth, how are you seeing this? I mean, again, from both within the company. So I think, interestingly, you talked a lot about the external part. You said the internal part is about motivating employees, fix a greater cause, which also is, in a way, doing business, which is not business, and align with something much more, let's say, relevant to what the country needs, and is more specifically the energy bill. But tell us about what you will do or could do when your products finally go to the market, which should be soon, and how will you work on trying to attract people to your product, because there are other products, and what is any of this that we've spoken of going to matter?
But Govind, can I ask him one more question before that? Which is, on just this area of stereotypes and social norms, I think you've done work, right? And that's great work. And I just want that, if you can just actually talk about some of those, because what I spoke about is research and literature, and sometimes what I've seen play out. But I know, having been on JSW Cement and now on Dulux, the work that you've done. So maybe you could actually talk about some of that.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest stereotypes that has been busted over the last decade and it's only been a decade in India is sport. And we obviously were one of the first supporters of Indian wrestling from the corporate side. And Indian women wrestling was probably the biggest stereotype that Haryanvi women are not supposed to wrestle. And it is only men who can enter akhadas, and women have no place in akhadas. And I remember we made a very interesting commercial on the Will of Steel, which was the story of Geeta Fogart, and how she broke all stereotypes, and how because of one woman's courage, it led to the Olympic medal of Sakshi Malik in the 2016 Rio Olympics. And even now, the Indian women's wrestling team is far stronger than the Indian men's wrestling team. And we see this theme across many sports now in India. Just recently, we started supporting rowing. And the men's rowing program has been supported since independence by the Indian Army. And they have a year-round camp. They get the best of nutrition, best of physiotherapy, best in sports science. And recently, the men's pair in a non-Olympic event actually won India's first ever World Cup medal, gold medal. The women have not been supported at all. And our sports scientists at the Inspire Institute of Sport actually picked up rowing, and specifically women's rowing, as a very, very strong chance for India to win an Olympic medal at the Brisbane Olympics in 2032. And we've now adopted women's rowing, and the Inspire Institute of Sport is the National Center of Excellence for women's rowing. Now, the women who come and are training and who are now living at the Inspire Institute, they've just qualified for the Asian Games. It will be the first time ever that the Indian women's team has qualified for the Asian Games. I mean, the progress they're making is just astronomical. It's not even, it's something that the experts had never expected. But it's just because that it was a stereotype that, oh, how can women row? How can women wrestle? How can women play cricket? And today, you know, an unbelievable stat, more Indians watched the World Cup final when Indian women won the World Cup at the D.Y. Patil, beating South Africa in the final, than Indians who watched the T20 World Cup final of the men's. So in a span of just 4 years, the women's game in cricket has gone to such heights that nobody expected it. So I think sports is a great barometer on how stereotypes are getting busted. And it's amazing now you're watching women's referees in the Men's World Cup, right? It's incredible that they're carding Lionel Messi and they're carding Cristiano Ronaldo. And no, you can't even argue with them. It's like it's a bit like being at home again, where you can't really argue at home. So it's all how the world, I mean, is evolving, and how India is also evolving. And I think we've seen it firsthand in sports. And I can make a prediction that the women in India at the Olympic level will win more medals than the men for the next 3 Olympics. That's the kind of roadmap we have, and the kind of talent we have in our country. They've just never got the opportunity. And now that they're getting it, it's incredible to watch the progress that is.
So you're saying that this is driven, the nudges come from people like you, I mean, who are sponsoring it, or was it because the time had come? I mean, you know, sometimes things shift and turn because...
No, I think you always need heroes. You always need idols. And I think, obviously, Mary Kom was an incredible idol for the country. Karna Maleshwari started it, that a women weightlifter from India in 2000 goes into Sydney and wins an Olympic medal for our country in weightlifting. You can't even imagine that a woman is weightlifting and now has gone to the Olympic level and won a medal. Then you had Mary Kom. Then you had Saina Nehwal, and then you had Geeta Fogart and Sakshi Malik, And then more. So I think heroes are required. Now you have Harmanpreet Kaur lifting the World Cup. I mean, there are millions of Harmanpreet Kaurs now in India coming up from every corner. So heroes are very important. Idols are very important. Role models are very important. And I think that's what's happening. And we're seeing it in business now. You have, Falguni Nair coming and creating Nykaa. Indira Nooyi made a very unfair statement, I think, when she said that, the India that I grew up in, or the India, I could never become CEO in India. But that's not true anymore of India. So I think, but idols are important. So Falguni Nair probably is an idol for any woman trying to become I think a
CEO late stage founder is more like it. Yeah.
So that you need heroes. Arundhati Bhattacharya is a hero, is an idol. Many. So I think idols are very important.
Sure.
And I think like for example, one of our steel units in Maharashtra actually is run completely by women. And and in our factory in Halol, in the MG factory, 43% of the workforce are women. Now, again, this is an example that if it can be done in one place, it can be done across the country. So it's about leading by example. It's about setting an example, and then more and more will happen on its own. That's what I believe.
Actually, that's an interesting example, because women on the shop floor, I know a lot of women want to be on the shop floor, but there are states in this country where they don't feel safe enough to travel because of shifts and so on. So the desire is there, the hunger is there, but the infrastructure is perhaps not ready, at least all over the country. So you were saying?
Yeah, no, I wanted to add, because there are a number of important points that you made there, and I want to actually, at the risk of belaboring, highlight a few of them, which is, if you take the areas where the stereotypes are strongest and turn them, the effect is phenomenal, right? So like you spoke about wrestling, right? A typical body sport where you would not have women. I remember, when I was still doing my Harvard fellowship, and I had interviewed Mr. Sheshagri Rao, he told me in JSW Steel, some of the crane operators were women, right? Typically something which you would associate as dangerous, going up. And they were doing a phenomenal role because of the fact they were extremely meticulous in doing it. And I'm using gender here as an example, and the book does focus on gender. But there's a fantastic article there written by a global call center head who talks about autistic people, how they're used in call centers, not because you're trying to be charitable, but because they just fit the role. They just do that work so well. And two more things. I know you've got something to say. I wanted to talk about two more things here, which is on WPL, on the Women's Cricket League, because I don't think enough has been spoken or said about it, because, of course, as a fun aside, I remember we were on your plant visit, and JSW was kind of bidding for it. And I was just hoping and praying that you win it, because I thought this was, it's a mass sport. Like it or, whether we don't like it, cricket is the biggest sport in India. And I actually compare it in the book, like in the 1990s when we have the Panchayati Raj, and a lot of people, and there was women's reservation made for the first time, and a lot of people said that what's the point, it'll be the man behind the woman who would drive it. And that's the way it happened. But it was a fantastic experiment which was studied by a lot of Ivy League universities abroad. And one of the things, and I quote that in my book in two instances, is in a small village in Murshidabad in West Bengal, where I come from, in one of the most patriarchal places where they'd never had women, and you would think West Bengal is a little bit more advanced, not so. They were really upset about having to, vote, because they were forced to get women at that panchayati level. And cutting a long story short, when we talk about social norms, and even when I taught in IIM Ahmedabad, even the students would say, oh, these are social norms, these take like years, 50 years, 80 years to change. And I gave them this example. It took 2 years of electing a woman to power for it to normalize. Norms come from what you, YCAT, what you see is all there is. The same men, in the third time, they actually had the 33% reservation. If you go at the panchayat level, if you actually look at statistics, about 46 to 48% are women who are voted in. And these happen at villages, right? So once you've seen a woman in power, it gets normalized, right? And I draw the parallel to WPL, the Women's Cricket Premier League, as an example where this has multiplier benefits. Being a mass sport, it means women can, for the first time, girls can reclaim public spaces. You go out and play. There's an economic incentive if you get picked up, and cricket is a mass sport. Unlike tennis, unlike some of the other games, this is played at roadsides, at street level, right? Villages, tier 4, tier 5 cities. So, and one is that side. The other is the media portrayal around it. For the first time, you have women, fitness apparel, that whole thing from being decorative, sexualized cheerleaders to the transformation into, you're fit, you're sort of powerful, you're not remotely sexualized, and that's actually so, the whole image changes. So this, to me, is again a fabulous example of, the timing can sometimes vary. It could be, to your question, you needed a legislation to get women on boards, right? And I think that was absolutely timed perfectly. But sometimes you need, in this instance, it was the private sector thinking that, there was a lot of, people were not sure how much money you would lose, by supporting a women's cricket league. But as he said, it became the highest watched sort of game, and it has multiplied benefits. So to me, these are ways in which you can take a social norm and shift it, upend it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, I was going to say, when you mentioned that women want to work on the shop floor, but because of transportation or working at night, it becomes difficult. And there's a lot you can do with changing the infrastructure. When we hired trans people in Godrej properties, some of them couldn't buy apartments or houses, so we provided housing for them. So all these things can be done to become more inclusive, and that's very important. And another thing that Godrej Properties did was distributed CVs without name, sex, or any kind of identifying marks, and especially in the pre-selection. And they found that the number of discriminated groups that were selected shot up tremendously. And I asked them that what happened in the second round when they did have this sort of information. But the very fact that they had shortlisted these people encouraged them to hire them.
I think
sorry, I'm interrupting you again and again, but I wanted to make another point. There is a lot of empirical evidence. This whole science is based on empirical evidence on what has worked and what hasn't. Now, the correlation, unlike a physical science, will never be perfect, right? You need to test it out in our context, in the context of a business in India. But two things I will mention. When you spoke about factory environment, one is safety. The other is, in a factory, ergonomics, right? What you're pulling from what height, and it has to be in line, right? Now, the interesting thing I want to point out here is, take an entity like Cummins, which worldwide wanted to encourage women to come to the shop floor, right? So what they created was an extremely ergonomic work environment. The interesting thing which came out of that was it made productivity jump up because the men loved it as well. So when you do something for a smaller group, what it more often than not does, and what comes as an unintended good consequence, is that the majority also love it. Because who would not like a more ergonomic workplace, right? So there are many interesting things. On the other hand, a lot of people try to say, okay, we will give only the facility of work from home on, say, a particular 2 days in a month or whatever to women, because they look after children. To me, both internationally and in India, you ought not to do it, because there is enough evidence in more that it creates a backlash. Everybody needs time off, right? So if you want to do it for all. So the other thing, which is very interesting in the book, which I do, is I keep saying that don't do something because you think intuitively it is right. Look for data, look at what has worked, try it out, figure if it's likely to work, and then do it, because otherwise it makes no sense. And I'm going to give one more example. Sorry, I'm eating into a lot of time. Is, this whole thing about, another gender example, about a longer maternity leave, which we have in our country, right? I think it just perpetuates gendered norms again. I've spoken actively against it, written against it. So one of the companies I was associated with actually said that, look, we have parental leave, but we don't see any men taking it. And I said, if it remains in your policy manual, nobody's going to take it. So again, in the academic literature, they're called norm entrepreneurs. If you want to change a social norm, coming back to this in simple words, choose 3 or 4 high potential men who've had recently children, right? Induce them to take it, right? There will be a few who would want to take it. Induce them to take it. Celebrate it. Go to town halls. Talk about it. You don't need to know what is outside of this organization, what the social milieu is, even if that is regressive. If you do it within your entity and you encourage that behavior, again, the same herding instinct. The other men who are similar ages, even if their beliefs are different, they will not want to be the odd ones out. If these are the 4 high potential men which this company really likes and they're encouraging this behavior, we will also take the parental leave. So what you do, I just finish with that, is you have a very interesting thing which in the behavioral sciences we call, you change behavior before you can change beliefs. Beliefs take longer. You can change behavior before that. And that's extremely important. And I just give one example, there are many.
India won 8 medals from the 15 contingent we took to France in 2023. And next year we are going to Finland with 25 contingent from India, and hopefully we'll have all 25 medals. One of the questions I have, we like it or not, we agree or not, but the world's first trillionaire is a person with neurodiversity. The people who brought the world to change, from Steve Jobs to Graham Bell to Ogden Nash, and I can keep going on, were people with neurodiversity. But interestingly, each one of them were founders, entrepreneurs. It's very interesting that after 65 years of starting women advocacy, we still need discussion on women alignment and women equity. 15% of the world population are people with disability, with economic representation of less than 0.001%. We are straight away losing the economic value, forget the social value. What can we start doing now that at least 20 years down, if not earlier, we can have at least 5% of the top 100 taxpayers as persons with disability? What can we do differently today to eventually create pathways for them to be in the boardroom? And not out of any reservation, but purely because they merit that. What can we do today? And what can you tell your business leaders today to create that empowerment while hiring somebody with a 2 crore or 3 crore or 5 crore package? If there's a person with disability there, just go ahead, extend your arms, because we need many more Arundhati Bhattacharyas, we need many more Naina Kidwais, we need many more Indra Nooris, but now coming from the disability set as well. There's a very, there's a fantastic word going on in the world called role mapping based hiring. Thankfully, nobody asked me 20 years back that what can a side Chinese person do? Else I wouldn't have never rose up to the leadership ranks in a financial services, which has got everything to do with numbers. How do we really break this thing of role mapping?
Firstly, thank you so much. It was a very inspiring session. I really resonated with what Parth said when he said about purpose. And I was just thinking a lot more about it, that if you have to break biases, I have seen, like, for example, my mother was a single working mother, and for her, the purpose was her kids. She inspired me to get the best education, IIT, HBS. For me, I come from Rajasthan. I've worked at Procter, didn't see a woman on the shop floor. So when I'm running Open Secret, the factory is run by women completely because that's my purpose. I'm thinking, how can I have the same purpose-led thinking for the organization and for people around me so that we can drive this change faster? Like, we are having this discussion, but the real fuel is purpose, and I really love that. So what can we do, and how can we do more of that?
Sudapa, you spoke about stereotypes, right? And they exist in society because they're deeply entrenched. And it takes time to undo these stereotypes. And it's good for society to do that, sports, etc. But when it comes to business, we live in a capitalist world, right? It's not just about for the benefit, but we need to see financial ROI on that. And not everybody, Parth is you or Mr. Godrej. The corporate world outside, beyond you, it's not easy to do. You need conviction. You need authority to do that. Somebody like you, not everybody has that. And it's just a very long arc of making that change happen. How do you make that happen in a real capitalist world beyond idealism?
Okay. Anyone else?
I just want all of you to answer just one small thing, which is one person who, according to you, has broken the most stereotypes. Very simple, very short.
Most, sorry?
One person that each one of you identifies has broken the most stereotypes in the corporate world. Broken.
Yeah. Okay, got it. So I'm assuming there's anyone, did I miss anyone on extreme right, left? Okay. Let me begin with you, Parth, and I'll come back, and I know you're going to read a forward or an extract of the forward for us as well, which you must listen to and do sort of stay on for that. Parth, so as you look ahead, I was asking you about the company. I think that was what Anuj's question was in a way as well, right? So, I mean, all of this finally is good to do, but if you're not large already and you don't have that tailwind of, capital, mostly capital, I think, and I guess legacy behind you, maybe these are tougher targets to achieve or tougher objectives to achieve. So how do you see that? And then as you are going to roll out a product, since you talked about cars, and cement, of course, is a commodity. But is there a tension between what you want to do and what the product finally becomes?
Yeah, I think it's a tough question because you're asking me to think about it if I didn't have legacy. So I am the wrong person to ask about that. But having said that, what I would say is that it should not be an objective. If you think of it as an objective and as a target that I need diversity or I'm imposing diversity onto my organization or onto my workplace, I think that's a very limiting sort of thought. The truth is that the benefit of having the diversity, whether it is disability, whether it is gender, it far outweighs any objective. It is a very different way in which the thinking happens, and the thinking is brought onto the table, which only makes your proposition internally and externally much stronger. So whenever, even with Sudapa, we had many conversations about this, and I would impose on my HR that, we got to get to 10% gender diversity, like, that's it. And Sudapa would always ask, like, what does that even mean? Like, what do you mean when you make that kind of a statement? She wouldn't say it in front of everyone, but she would tell me later that, what does that mean? Like, have you thought about where, or have you thought about how, or have you thought about which functions, or have you thought about, where the value would come? And I think that's the much better way of thinking about it, because like she gave the example about Cummins and how by getting gender or getting the diversity onto the shop floor, it led to many other benefits for the organization. So I think that is the benefit of diversity. And if you are thinking of it that, oh, it's a good to have or it's a must have, and that's why I should do it, then you're doing it for the wrong reasons. But if you think about it, that, there's going to be a lot of value addition that happens. There's going to be a lot of, thought-provoking decisions that you would have otherwise made in this young men sort of an environment where everyone is like hoo, ha, ha, and everyone is doing Wolf of Wall Street and wants to, do the same thing. And you need someone to actually challenge that status quo. That's why you should do it. You shouldn't do it for any other reason.
Got it. Okay. So I think there are a bunch of questions. Do you want to respond to that in your closing comments as well? Or?
So, it all comes down to this. So I just remember, when I taught in IIM Ahmedabad, there was one girl. And when we began the course, I used to ask them. And by the way, both years we had equal number of men and women, which was very strange, right? We had some 50 in one, and I think some 45 in one. This was an elective. And there was one, and we asked them why they took that course, right? Because it was one of the most offbeat courses in IIM Ahmedabad in that year. I taught, I think, in 2017 and 18. And it was called A Gender Lens on Corporate Policies. So if you use the lens of gender, what do you see? And how would you change it? And it was not, at all an activist shouting from the rooftops. It was about acting smartly. Right? And that's, in a way, what he alluded to, and I'm just using the word smart, because shouting from the rooftops and saying it's an unfair world does nothing, right? The world will continue to remain unfair. Anyway, so this girl said, there is sometimes some of these remarks which come, and they had already gotten their job, so it's an interesting anecdote. And she got a job, and everybody immediately said, oh, you wear a skirt, no wonder they picked you up. And it was in one of the beverage companies, or one of the, I don't know which company it was. So she said, and I'm filled with this incoherent rage. And that's why I opted for this course. So when the course was over, we were going around, and what did you take from it? So I asked her specifically, because I remembered her comment, because it was a very telling comment. And so she said, instead of incoherent rage, now, and she told me, I'm not as articulate as you are, but I have a good set of reasons to tell people why I wouldn't react by shouting, screaming. I will give them a whole set of reasons, which kind of really pleased me, because the whole thing is about doing things smartly. When we come to gender, one of the things that a lot of companies do is gender sensitization training. Now, there is overwhelming data that it creates a backlash. People come and think that it's a session for bhashan. We have to come, listen to it, and they go back and do exactly sometimes the opposite, right? And you don't know what's happening in the workplace. So the point, as I keep on saying, is to do things, go by data, and unfortunately, there's not much repository. I've used this book to actually collect some of the data which has been, where things have been successful. I'll talk about one company which is not here, but where I sit on the board, where I was astonished when I was brought into that board, and I was told that, so the board is majority women. And in fact, the independent directors is more women. I have one of my colleagues from that board here. And I was like, so this is Zomato. And I actually asked him, I said, what? So why aren't we calling a press conference? Why aren't we talking? So he said, yeah, but 50% women, 50% men. I just thought, let's start at the top and have equal number of women on the board. So I said, but at least let's write something. So we wrote our first article, we just co-authored it with Dipinder. It was called Cognitive Diversity. And I said, gender diversity is there, but each person is different. I have the lady here. She's a 9 times badminton champion, Aparna Popat. She's here today. She's on the board with me. And, and it was as diverse as it gets, with three independent directors, apart from me, 3 of them, who were first-time directors. Now, that's called diversity to me, where you're thinking completely in almost the way a maverick would in the Indian context. So I'm not answering anybody's question specifically, but I'm just laying a point that you need to act smartly, go against the market norm, go against the social norm. As Parth said, if you're recruiting, take the function as he does in sports, take the one which is the most male-dominated one, append the norm there. There are lots of multiplier benefits for that. We didn't talk about one thing which I've done, at least in both of the boards which I sit on foundations and in the CSR committees. I keep saying non-traditional employment for the women. Not the pickle making, not the uniforms. Get them out, out of their homes. Let them drive 3-wheelers. Let them be primary healthcare owners. That, busting any stereotype, has multiplier benefits.
Got it. Mr. Godrej, last word and last poem as well.
I'll read the poem. There's a capitalistic strain that enthrones shareholder gain And Milton Friedman could see that this simplistic philosophy could lead to great efficiency. But where there's externality, this capitalism, red in tooth and claw, can prove to be a dismal flaw. Correction can come from regulation or even from self-remediation. And Adam Smith himself foresaw that business could address this flaw. This proposition is easy to state, but yet we find that we wait and wait. Sudapa Banerjee took a fresh look, and she came up with this interesting book. And all of us, I'm sure, will learn a socially responsible way to earn. Behavioral science is the key. It is a refreshing way to see. For those who choose not to budge, can we provide them with a nudge?
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've run out of time. I think there are a lot of things to sum up, but I think one of the lines that I'll take away is clearly that you can change behavior much more easily than beliefs. And I think that's a very pertinent statement in the Indian context in general and business in specific.
One idea that surprised me a lot was an innovation to make a wheelchair roadworthy so that it could enable disabled people to get a new job in doing delivery at the last mile. Energy efficiency is a very good way to become more sustainable, and it can actually save you money because you use less energy and pay less for it.
Yeah, I think sustainability is a misnomer. People think that it's more expensive, but actually it can save the business a lot of money. Like going from halogen bulbs to LED bulbs, not only is more sustainable, but it saves money. You can get solar power onto your business owner, onto your business, so onto the rooftops. That can power the water, that can power the air conditioning, and it can become much cheaper and more sustainable. If you have a larger business, you can even switch completely to renewable energy. And then I think individually also there are many personal choices you can make that can make your business and make yourself more sustainable, like choosing sustainable products and going plastic free. So I think sustainability begins with yourself, and if you believe in it, it can percolate into your business. I think if you want to attract more women into the workforce, they need to see women in roles of power within the company. So if you hire a woman at a vice president level or at a president level, that's a very big sign to budding women that in this organization I can rise up to the very top, and that attracts a lot more women into the workforce. The other thing is obviously having sexual harassment training, as well as having a helpline where all women can, if there's any code of conduct violation, they can report it to HR and to seniors in the organization. So I think these two things can play a big role in getting more women into the workforce.
The book is actually about consequential decision making, and the uniqueness of the book lies in actually using a behavioral insights lens on key business decisions that not just impacts markets or the business itself, but also consequential decisions that impact society. So these are all people that I know personally, and I know they have interesting perspectives. So to me, they were either experts in their domain, or they run an interesting business, have perspectives which are important, and I needed a set of diverse perspectives for this book.
The session at the Cube was excellent. The venue is very good, and the questions asked were very useful, and Sudapa was able to explain the book very well, and Parth Jindal and I could give many examples from industry where these ideas can actually be put to use
with great benefit to society as well as industry.
Yeah, this was my first time to Quorum actually. I think it's a world-class venue, an absolutely amazing crowd, amazing members, fantastic venue, really well organized. The amount of follow-up that was done for the event, the kind of confirmations that happened, and then even though there was such a torrential rain outside, the fact that so many people actually came for the event was amazing. But I think overall incredibly well organized, really felt like I was not in Mumbai, I could have been in anywhere in the world, and you know, will definitely come back to experience all of Quorum and all of Q.